All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle, and then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the two things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. Let's see, I can tell you. I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell.
Trump has just made a fool of himself on the world stage. At the United Nations in New York, two very different images of leadership have emerged. On one side, President Donald Trump turned his address to the world into a spectacle that blended personal grievances with campaign slogans. He spoke about broken teleprompters, escalators that stalled, and his belief that he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. The moment that should have showcased American vision became a reminder of how unpredictable and unfocused the White House has become. On the other side, Prime Minister Mark Carney used his own stage in New York to underline Canada's role in global trade and cooperation. He framed his country as a partner ready to fill the vacuum when others retreat. The contrast is sharp, and it tells us something important about where economic and political credibility now lies. Trump's remarks at the UN were not a roadmap for foreign policy. They were a repeat of familiar domestic talking points. He warned that countries were going to hell. He dismissed clean energy as a scam, and he exaggerated his own achievements. The substance that leaders expect from the American president was missing. Instead of building support for U.S. initiatives, he gave the impression of a leader caught in grievance politics. Behind the theatrics sits a deeper reality. Trump's reciprocal tariffs, rolled out earlier this year, were sold as a tool to reset global trade. Yet their effect has been mixed at best. The U.S. International Trade Commission noted in a September update that sectors like autos and metals have faced supply chain disruptions, while consumer groups warn of rising costs in key imports. Rather than projecting economic strength, the president's speech highlighted the gap between his promises and the economic evidence. Beyond trade, the credibility gap is widening. Federal Reserve surveys released this fall show that small manufacturers report lower new orders compared to 2024, citing tariff-driven price hikes as a major reason. Supply chains that once flowed through Japan and Korea are now stalling because negotiations remain unresolved. These are not abstract numbers. They mean delayed shipments, higher costs for U.S. consumers, and fewer investment commitments in American factories. Trump promised that tariffs would unlock a wave of new jobs and capital, but the evidence from official agencies shows strain instead of revival. While Trump wandered through tangents at the UN, Carney was busy shaping a different narrative in New York.
We have the resources the world needs. We have the talent to turn that potential into growth. We're a reliable partner.
Speaking at policy forums, he emphasized that Canada has the resources, the technology, and the alliances to thrive even in a fractured trading system. He pointed to agreements with Mexico and talks with the European Union as steps to secure markets beyond the U.S. His tone was not dramatic but deliberate. He tied Canada's energy output, critical minerals, and investment potential into a strategy meant to reassure both investors and allies. Where Trump leaned on anecdotes about construction contracts and campaign slogans, Carney leaned on the fundamentals of economic credibility. This divergence matters. In a moment when global markets look for signals, one leader projected confusion while the other projected stability. The United Nations stage has long been where American presidents outline their vision for the world. This year, the stage revealed something else. Trump's reliance on theatrics, personal stories, and exaggerated claims has turned a serious platform into an echo of domestic rallies. Instead of reinforcing the case for his tariff strategy, his words exposed its weakness. They showed a leader searching for validation while allies and rivals alike questioned the direction of U.S. policy. Carney, by contrast, used the same setting to advance a coherent message about trade and partnership. His approach did not make headlines for odd tangents or technical mishaps. It made headlines because it was steady and forward-looking. For Canadians, it was a chance to show that they can carry responsibility on the global stage. For Americans, it was a reminder that when theater replaces strategy, credibility is the first casualty.
When it comes to trade relations, the future of the North American economy is at stake.
I am optimistic about the future because I look at the past.
Canadians staying home, that's their business. If you want to ban American alcohol, that's fine. There are reasons why the president and some of his team refer to Canada as being mean and nasty to deal with.
When the American ambassador lashes out at Canada, does it reveal U.S. frustration or Canadian resilience? That question surfaced after Pete Hoekstra, speaking in Halifax, dismissed Ottawa's Elbows Up campaign as anti-American. His criticism was meant as a warning, yet many Canadians interpreted it as proof that their pushback is being felt in Washington. Far from backing down, people across the country felt encouraged to stand taller, to buy Canadian goods, and to view the dispute as a chance to show unity. What was framed as an insult ended up reinforcing confidence that Canada's defensive stance is not only necessary, but effective. The spark for this moment lies in Washington's tariff strategy. Under President Trump's second term, reciprocal tariffs have been rolled out aggressively. In March 2025, the White House imposed a 25% duty on imported cars and auto parts under Section 232. By July, a 50% tariff on copper was added, alongside restrictions on high-grade scrap copper. Steel and aluminum remain under heavy duties as well. The Department of Commerce itself confirmed that these sectoral tariffs are designed to expand beyond metals, and Canadian producers have been bracing for the next wave. What this has created is not compliance, but uncertainty. Business leaders in both countries point to the same reality. Investments stall when duties appear and disappear at a president's discretion. For Canadians, the lesson is clear. Trump's strategy has not weakened their resolve. Instead, it has driven consumers to buy Canadian, reinforced a culture of resilience, and made clear that reliance on American goodwill is a risk too great to ignore.
The Prime Minister kicked it off by traveling to Mexico last week for a summit without America. Mark Carney and his Mexican counterpart, Claudia Sheinbaum, signed an agreement aimed at deepening trade and investment between the two countries.
That realization explains why Prime Minister Mark Carney moved quickly to deepen ties with Mexico. Just days before Halifax, Carney met President Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico City and signed a bilateral agreement on trade and investment. This was no symbolic gesture. It was the first step in repositioning Canada inside North America's supply chain ahead of the 2026 review of the Trade Pact. By linking arms with Mexico, Canada shows that it can look beyond Washington. The Trudeau years often left Canada reacting to U.S. policy, but Carney is signaling a different path. Mexico offers a growing market for Canadian agriculture, energy, and manufacturing inputs. More importantly, this partnership sends a message to Washington that Ottawa is not negotiating alone. It also reassures Canadian businesses that the government is actively seeking stability. For farmers worried about canola exports or for auto suppliers nervous about new tariffs, the Mexico deal represents a lifeline. It does not erase the challenges of U.S. duties, but it creates an environment where Canadian producers can plan with greater confidence, knowing alternative channels are being built. Canada is searching out options in Europe, in Asia, and even cautiously in China, but Mexico is the most immediate and powerful lever. It transforms American pressure into an opportunity to rewire continental trade flows. The review of the USMCA, or CUSMA in Canada, will not erase the agreement. Few expect it to disappear. What is far more likely is a tightening of rules of origin, making it harder for Canadian products to qualify for duty-free access. That prospect is serious, yet it does not erase the shift we are witnessing now. American frustration, voiced bluntly in Halifax, has not intimidated Canadians. Instead, it has accelerated their search for partners and renewed their confidence in standing firm. Tariffs that were meant to corner Canada have united its consumers, its industries, and its leaders. Trump may say he loves tariffs, but the more he leans on them, the more Canada looks outward and discovers new strength. If Washington's disappointment is what fuels Canadian pride, then the balance of advantage in North America is already beginning to tilt in a new direction.
Headlines concerning ag-related bankruptcies are on the rise.
Farmland here in the Midwest is abundant, with farmers growing corn, soybeans, alfalfa, dairy, and beef. But recently, in the first quarter of this year, many farmers couldn't repay their debts.
Farmers are under a tremendous amount of economic stress.
Across America's farmland, daily life is filled with challenges. Weather, debt, and volatile prices already weigh on farmers. In 2025, tariffs have made the burden heavier. President Trump's trade war is not an abstract debate in Washington. It is a reality shaping whether family farms can survive another season.
We worry about drought, we worry about pricing, we worry about equipment, we worry about financing. This tariff is just another thing that we have to worry about.
Soybean farmers in Iowa, who depend heavily on exports, are facing deep uncertainty. China, the largest buyer of soybeans worldwide, has not pre-purchased shipments for this year's harvest. Normally, China takes more than 1/5 of U.S. exports. Without that market, bins of soybeans may sit unsold, while bills for fertilizer and equipment keep climbing. John Deere has warned that tariffs on steel and aluminum will add $600 million to its costs in 2025. Those increases trickle down to every farmer who needs a tractor or a part repaired. The story of soybeans captures the larger picture. American agriculture produces far more than the nation consumes, which means exports are essential. When tariffs close doors abroad, farmers cannot simply sell everything at home. Prices drop and revenue shrinks. This is not a new problem. In the 2018 trade dispute, retaliatory tariffs from China cost U.S. agriculture $27 billion, with soybeans alone making up 71% of the losses. Now history is repeating. Brazil has taken advantage of the opening, surpassing the United States as the world's leading soybean exporter. Farmers in the Midwest watch as markets they spent decades building slip away. Meanwhile, the costs of production continue to climb. Fertilizer, farm machinery, and fuel all carry higher prices because of tariffs on metals and other inputs. What was once a narrow profit margin has been squeezed to the breaking point. The financial stress is showing up in bankruptcy courts. In the first quarter of 2025, farm bankruptcies under Chapter 12 rose 95% compared to a year earlier, according to federal filings. Chapter 12 is a special part of U.S. bankruptcy law created for farmers and fishermen. It allows them to reorganize debts and keep their farms running while they work out a payment plan, rather than being forced to sell everything at once. In 2024, farmers in the Midwest filed 71 of these cases, a 69% increase from 2023. Behind every statistic is a family under pressure, often losing land and machinery after generations of work. When small and medium-sized farms collapse, their assets are usually purchased by large agribusiness operations. The trend toward consolidation accelerates, leaving even less space for family farms that still make up 95% of America's agricultural backbone. For many, the promise that tariffs would shield rural America rings hollow. Instead, they feel exposed to forces beyond their control, with little protection as prices drop and debts mount. Farming is more than business. It is legacy, culture, and identity. Yet that legacy is now at risk. Exports are falling, bankruptcies are rising, and uncertainty is spreading across the countryside. Even with new federal commitments, such as the $65 billion in agricultural spending signed into law in July, most of the money is directed toward crop insurance and disaster assistance. Those programs may soften the impact of bad weather, but they cannot restore lost markets or stabilize prices. American farmers know the stakes. Without reliable trade partners and consistent policy, no amount of short-term aid will be enough. What they need is clarity, not chaos. They need stability, not shifting tariffs. Until that arrives, the reality remains the same. Trump's tariffs are leaving America's farmers squeezed between falling crop prices and rising costs, struggling to hold on to their land and wondering if the family farm can survive another year.
We've been talking about this Department of War. So we won the First World War, we won the Second World War, we won everything before that and in between, and then we decided to go woke and we changed the name to Department of Defense. So we're going Department of War.
Donald Trump has just signed an executive order that rebrands the Pentagon. The Department of Defense, created in 1947, will now carry a new secondary title, the Department of War. On the surface, it is just a symbolic move, since only Congress can change the name officially. But in Trump's world, symbolism is the point. The timing is no accident. For months, he has been escalating trade wars, slapping tariffs on rivals and allies alike. Canada saw its non-CUSMA goods hit with a 35% rate on August 1st. India was pushed to 50% by the end of the month. Even Switzerland walked away from Washington with nearly 40% duties after failed talks. Allies who once leaned on American markets are now looking elsewhere, and rivals are cozying up with China. Surrounded by skepticism abroad, Trump chose to drop the language of defense and embrace the language of war. And so came the executive order to rename the Pentagon from the Department of Defense to the Department of War. This rebranding did not happen in a vacuum. By late August and early September, the global stage was already shifting. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin showcased a new closeness between Russia, China, and India. Countries that once competed with each other now pledged to expand trade in national currencies, deepen cooperation in energy, and increase joint defense projects. It was a message to Washington that others were willing to move on without it. At the same time, Trump's tariffs had pushed allies toward other partners. Canada expanded exports to Europe. The European Union accepted a 15% tariff cap with Washington, but held back from deeper concessions, keeping options open. Japan and South Korea committed hundreds of billions in investment to secure similar arrangements. Mexico won a 90-day delay before higher duties hit. India's case was the most striking. After being punished with 50% tariffs for buying Russian oil, New Delhi turned toward Moscow and Beijing and away from Washington. It scrapped plans for the American F-35 fighter jet and announced cooperation on the Su-57E with Russia instead. What had started as tariff pressure ended up driving countries into new alignments that looked less like isolated disputes and more like the formation of an alternative power bloc.
And I'd like to ask our Secretary of War to say a few words. Pete Hegseth. I think it's a much more appropriate name, especially in light of where the world is right now. We have the strongest military in the world. We have the greatest equipment in the world. We have the greatest manufacturers of equipment by far. There's nobody to even compete.
Against this backdrop, Trump staged a new performance in the Oval Office. Cameras watched as he signed the order granting the Department of Defense a secondary title, the Department of War. The change cannot be formal without Congress, but symbolism was the point. He declared that the old name sounded too weak, too defensive. War, he insisted, matched the spirit of victory. At his side, Pete Hegseth introduced himself as the Secretary of War, as if stepping into a new role in a political trauma. The signing was less about bureaucracy and more about showmanship. It was meant to project resolve, to tell Americans that their military would not sit back and react, but act first. For Trump, whose trade battles had pushed friends away and fueled suspicion that the world was closing ranks against the United States, the word war captured his own sense of being surrounded. Yet the paradox is clear. Trump calls himself a president of peace, but his actions have created conflict on every front. Tariffs strained old friendships, global rivals built new ties, and now the Pentagon itself carries the language of war. The rebranding reflects a worldview where compromise is weakness, and every challenge is a battle. In chasing victory, Trump risks standing alone. The Nobel Peace Prize may be out of reach, but if there were an award for renaming defense into war and picking fights everywhere, Trump would already be holding it.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is in Europe tonight, hoping to build trade and defense cooperation with key allies. Canada has pivoted across the pond as tensions simmer with our southern neighbor.
The relationship between the United States and Canada has rarely felt so unsettled. President Donald Trump has used tariffs as his favorite instrument of pressure, reshaping the way America interacts with its closest neighbors. In Washington, the tone has been sharp, focused on extracting concessions through surprise measures and tough rhetoric. North of the border, Prime Minister Mark Carney has taken a different path. Rather than respond with fire against fire, he is building a strategy centered on patience, alliances, and long-term leverage. The question facing both countries is not just about tariffs today. It is about whether Canada can hold its ground while reshaping its future beyond America's shadow.
Prime Minister Carney announcing yesterday that Canada will be dropping some countermeasures on American goods.
In terms of the strategy here, it's probably a smart play for Canada to really underscore the importance and the value of CUSMA.
Carney's most recent move was to scale back many of Canada's retaliatory tariffs on American goods. The change will be visible on supermarket shelves, where Canadian families may see lower prices on everyday products like fruit juice and food staples. Canadian manufacturers that rely on U.S. components will also feel some relief. On the surface, this might look like a concession, but in reality, it is a deliberate gesture designed to highlight the value of the Canada-US-Mexico agreement. Roughly 85 to 90% of Canadian exports to the United States already travel tariff-free under that pact. By removing countermeasures on CUSMA-covered goods, Carney is showing that Canada respects the deal and expects Washington to do the same.
So as we work to address outstanding trade issues with the United States, it's important, it's vital. We do everything we can to preserve this unique advantage for Canadian workers, Canadian businesses.
The real sticking points remain in metals and autos. The United States continues to apply tariffs of up to 50% on steel, aluminum, and copper, citing national security provisions. Canada has kept some retaliatory measures in place on those products. This mix of relief and resistance is intentional. It demonstrates goodwill without abandoning leverage, and it signals that Canada is ready to negotiate seriously on the areas that matter most. Instead of bending, Carney is pacing the talks and ensuring that Canada sets terms of engagement rather than reacting blindly to every move from Washington.
As the trade war with the United States continues, Carney has been focused on diversifying trade, especially with Europe. Canada's energy and critical minerals are top of the pitch list.
Carney's approach is not limited to North America. While discussions with the Trump administration continue, he has crossed the Atlantic to strengthen ties with Europe. His itinerary includes meetings with leaders in Germany, Poland, and Latvia, alongside sessions with major business executives. Canada's pitch is clear. It can be a reliable supplier of energy and critical minerals at a time when European governments are anxious about secure supply chains. This European push comes at a sensitive moment. The European Union only recently accepted a tariff framework with the United States that set a 15% baseline on many goods, while higher duties remained on steel and aluminum. Canada is watching that experience closely. By stepping in with offers of energy, minerals, and defense cooperation, Ottawa is positioning itself as an attractive partner, just as Europe seeks alternatives to U.S. pressure. The presence of Canadian troops in Poland and Latvia under Operation Reassurance also reinforces Canada's credibility as both a security and economic partner. What might look like a simple trade mission is in fact a statement of independence. Canada is diversifying its options and making clear that it will not be cornered. The contrast between Washington and Ottawa is clear. Trump thrives on confrontation, using tariffs to unsettle allies. His method creates urgency and seeks fast concessions. Carney is shaping a slower game. He lowers costs at home, keeps leverage, and builds partnerships abroad. The strategy may not grab headlines like Trump's moves, but it builds resilience. For Canada, this is not about bowing to American power. It is about proving that a middle power with the right resources and alliances can withstand turbulence and turn it into strength. The coming months will test both leaders. Trump will push through tariffs and deadlines. Carney will counter with alliances and economic cards. Canada is not reacting anymore. It is standing tall, steering its own path, and reminding the world its choices matter.